What was your don't tell your mother moment with your dad? My mother had to move away for a year for job related reasons. I remember clearly that she sat my father down in the kitchen, who up until that point had been the one to work more and had been around less, and told him exactly what the rules were for us kids. One of them was being in bed by 9 p.m. As soon as she was out the door, my father turned to me and said, "Children of the Corn is on tonight, you want to watch it?" It was on at 2 a.m. and the first horror movie I watched. I was 11. Luckily I loved it and horror movie nights became our secret thing to do when my mother wasn't around. Goodness, I hate that movie. Not because it's bad, rather I was also young when I saw it, growing up in the country, with cornfields. Once my mum was out of town and she left me with my dad. My dad, not being the best cook in the world, proposed to go out for a pizza. After the dinner he drove in the industrial area, a very well-known area, to receive some kind of special services during the night. So he approached a prostitute and asked how much for this young fella. I wanted to jump out off the passenger seat and run under a car. I was 16 at the time. I managed to bury and forget about this until today. Thanks Reddit. I wish my dad would buy me pizza and all he does is offer unconditional love and material support. Not from my dad, but from my near-deaf granddad, as he gives me a pocket knife. Don't tell your mother I gave IT to you. Sorry I shouted, but that's how it happened. Yay, granddad. Before my dad passed away we ran a family business together selling flooring. He had been sick with lymphoma for about 7 years. He passed after 10 and was in a lot of chronic pain. He was the toughest guy I ever met and never missed a day of work aside from his bone marrow transplant up until 2 days before he died. One random day I came in from one of the job sites we had on the go at the time. I was with a friend who my dad hired to give him some income. We saw my dad sitting on the pavement leaning on the store with his head down. I panicked thinking something was wrong. I come up and say, "Everything okay?" He looks up and just has the most bloodshot eyes ever. He goes, "Fricking Keith gave me grass for the pain. I haven't smoked in 30 years. I said, "Are you okay?" He says, "I'm not in pain for the first time in months, but I'm too scared to go back in there in case there's customers." We got him water and he sat reclined in his van in the air conditioning listening to Black Sabbath until lunch. Then he ordered a pizza and ate more than I can remember him ever eating post sickness. On the way home after we dropped off my friend, he says, "If you think lymphoma is bad, you should see what happens if your mother finds out about me smoking grass." I took the hint and never told her. He's been gone 9 years, and a month ago at my wedding my mom, myself, and my groomsmen are swapping stories about my dad. My friend who was there that day says, "You remember when we went to your store and your dad was stoned as crap and all he wanted was Black Sabbath and air conditioning?" The shock on my mom's face was picturesque. She couldn't believe it. After getting us to give her every detail of that day, she looks up at the ceiling, shakes her fist and says, "You are in so much trouble when I get up there." I didn't ask for these feels. I just ran over to the house and gave my dad a hug. I was 13 and we were coming back from a trip. We were on an old highway that my dad had traveled a lot in his childhood. He was exhausted from driving the whole way through the night, so with an hour left, he pulled over, told me to trade seats with him, and told me to drive until we were back in town. I'd never driven before beyond a couple of lessons in a parking lot. He told me to keep it under the speed limit and don't pass anyone. I thought I'd be really big and I got on the interstate. An hour later, I pulled into the gas station by our mom's house and swapped back with him. He looked at me and said, "You did great, but remember to give semis more breathing room. Their brakes are better than ours." I had no clue he had been awake the entire time. Then he looked at my brother, "Don't even think about telling your mom and you'll be doing this in a couple years, too." When I was 15 I used to skateboard up and down my street from the time I got home from school until I went to work. One day my dad met me at the end of the road coming home from his job and told me to grab onto the bumper of his 1993 Bronco. I held it for a bit, but at around 20 miles per hour I started to lose control and the wobble was too hard to handle. I was just wearing shorts and a t-shirt and I destroyed my forearms and legs. I was scabbed up for quite a while. And my mom never knew that it was because I was pulled behind the car. I told her I went down a nearby hill too fast and lost control. My dad wrote me a couple sick notes for my silence, and I got to stay home from school and bulls for a couple days. For at least 10 years of my life, I've bugged my parents to let me race cars. Finally, when I was 19, my dad agreed to let me do skip barber racing school, but the only condition was that I couldn't let my mom know. She's super nervous and protective, and the only reasons I was never allowed to start racing was she could crash and die, and she's a girl and only boys like cars. She came from a very old-fashioned family. Anyways, my dad ended up withdrawing money as a money order to pay for racing school, and he told my mom that he was coming to visit me for the weekend during the 5 days that I had the classes. Mom still to this day doesn't know. My dad would let me watch South Park with him, and the whole "oh my god, they killed Kenny you bastards" became a thing. The only time he'd let me curse was when my mom wasn't around. Then one day she overheard us. Dad got in trouble and he came sulking into my room and says, "Hey N7 Scully, we can't say it anymore, but I still got to watch South Park." So cute that he called you by your username. It happened a few months ago. My mother works as a nurse in a Danish insurance company. Sometimes she's out getting patients who have been hurt and make sure they come safely home to Denmark. Now, right after my final exam, physics and chemistry, in which I got an A, I come home to two lovely things. To the message that my mother is happy with my result but she was in the Caribbean getting a patient. My father, who's sitting in the kitchen with a grocery bag full of the sweets we usually buy in small quantities. Ice cream, soda, chocolate, the works. We ended watching Game of Thrones and enjoying burgers in our living room. My dad looks at me and says, "For all mother knows, we just ate the baked beans and eggs she prepared in the fridge." For some reason, I'm more interested in your mother's job. It sounds pretty dang cool. When I turned 16, my mom wouldn't let me get my license, but she really hated my dad. Divorced, and of course dad wanted his brownie points. He took me to get it about a week after I turned 16. My mom didn't know till I was 17 when I mentioned that I was driving one of my friend's car because he was tired. She flipped out on me, telling me that I only had my permit and I was breaking the law at the top of her lungs. I just pulled my license out of my wallet and kinda threw it at her. I'll never forget the look on her face. The reason she wouldn't let me get my license was because she required that I had a job first, but as a barely 16-year-old I just wanted to hang out with friends. She wasn't some crazy mother or anything. Tell us the look please. Divorced dad here. The time I saw Braveheart in the movies, despite being a kid. The time I first set off a firework. The time I and my father got into a mini brawl at the Meadowlands. My first visit to a strip club. My first drink. My first drink at a bar. My first P magazine. The time he bought me my first package of condoms. The time he was teaching me how to drive and told me to bury the needle in the red. Literally any moment I spent with my dad out of my mom's vision. Your dad sounds cool. I was out driving my mom's car one night and decided, against my better judgment of course, to go to the Saturday races with my buddies. Long story short, my buddy ends up rear-ending me and I lie to cover my butt saying it was a hit and run, but my buddy didn't. So word gets passed through our parents and my dad realizes the stories don't match. I'm fricked. Dad asks to see me one morning and basically rips me a new butthole before I left for school. That evening he pulls me aside and says, "I'm not going to tell your mother, but I need to know you're not going to get a hair across your butt one day and tell her the truth." Still a secret. 4 years later. I've never heard the saying "a hair across your butt." What does that mean? Oh boy, I was like 15 and I somehow had convinced my dad to buy me GTA SAR for my birthday, him not knowing what it actually was. When he saw a bit of me playing, he realized this crap wasn't for kids, and he told me something like, "Make sure your little bro never watches you playing this game." He was 7. Cue to a couple of days later, I'm going to the computer to play a bit, and there my father was, playing GTA, in a fire truck mowing down people on the sidewalk, with my little bro on his knees laughing. He gave me this look. I have a reverse. A don't tell your father. My mom fought and lost her 10-year battle with cancer. About 4 years into it, I was driving her to and from her chemo and radiation appointments, and after a session, she tells me she's going to kill herself. She lays everything out for me, and tells me where all the important documents are, and how she's going to do it. Pills, I pulled the car over on the highway and had it out with her. I found out she's been suicidal for over 50 years. That she'd gotten incredibly close several times. That the only reason she never did it was because of her kids. But now that we were all adults, there was nothing really stopping her. We talked and yelled and argued and cried on the side of the highway for 2 hours. At the end, she promised me she wouldn't kill herself, but that I had to promise that when she said she was done with treatment I had to not argue, which I kept. She then turned to me and said, "Don't tell your father," and I never have. He has this portrait of her in his mind as some sort of son, but I will never ever break that for him. I was really into Enid Blyton books when I was 8, but new books were a luxury that my family couldn't really afford. On paydays, my dad would bring me to the bookstore to grab a few new books and we'll sneak them home without telling mum. Looking back, my dad probably had to scrimp on some meals then, but it did encourage my lifelong love for reading. Father of the fricking year. Just turned 18 and my dad took me on a road trip to Lachlan for a little gambling. On the way there was the first and only time he told me about his experiences in Vietnam. He answered all of my questions, told me about friends who never made it home. At the end, he told me never to tell my mom, as he told me things she didn't even know. We've never discussed it since then, but being a vet now myself, I get it, and someday, I'll take my own son on a road trip. My dad bought a new muscle car, and we went out to the middle of nowhere, to a really straight road, to try to max it out. You feel a lot more alive at 145 than you do standing still. There were a few, but 2 are my favorites. The first was when we got some fireworks from my uncle. Dad and my brothers and I all started setting them off in the backyard with my dad handling the big ones. One of them went rogue and shot off into the neighbor's backyard and set a trash can on fire. Rather than put it out or go tell the neighbor, my dad looked at the 3 of us and then ran into the house. We followed. 5 minutes later there was a knock on the door and it was our neighbor. My brothers and I stayed hidden and listened as our dad proceeded to act as if this was all news to him and pinned the entire thing on my brothers and I and promised to handle the situation. After the neighbor left he begged us not to tell mom and promised to make it worth our while. My other favorite was when I was 12 and he kept me up until 2 AM because Monty Python and the Holy Grail was the late movie on ABC and he told me everyone needed to see that movie and that we would just tell mom I was sick the next day. My dad bought a plane and asked me not to tell my mom. I didn't, but I don't know how he expected her to not find out. I got straight A's in sophomore year high school. It was a rare occurrence in my household for me to get A's, so my proud father told me he would take me to GameStop to buy the new PS4. My mom told us our budget was only $200 bucks, but my dad said frick it and bought me the PS4 and GTA bundle, NBA 2K14, Call of Duty, Ghosts, by far our worst investment, an extra controller and a TV for me to play in my room. It wound up to being around $880 bucks, but my dad said he would just work extra hours to pay it off because of how proud he was of me. He didn't even have to tell me not to tell my mother. He just gave me the look in the eye once we got in the car. I love my parents. I'm an upcoming freshman in college, so I'm not too young. Only thing I ever got from semesters of straight A's was not getting my butt beat. I got my gun license and my dad never showed any interest in guns at all. A week later he brings me downstairs and shows me his safe he had tucked away. He tells me, "Your mother said when we got married, no guns in the house. Don't tell her." Once, my dad and I both had the same idea to play hooky from work school as a long con to avoid going to my mom's Christmas party at her school. We both hate hearing the children sing Christmas carols tone deaf. And my mom hates it when we don't go and suffer with her because then she has to suffer through it alone. I remember both of us coming out of our bedrooms and literally bumping into each other because we both thought we were the only ones home. We locked eyes and knew the truth. As silly as it is, I think this one is my favorite. My dad was into sailing. When we went sailing, he'd pick up a bottle of rum and a 6-pack of craft beer on the way. We'd get shithoused on the first night because we weren't going anywhere until the next morning. Started doing this with him around age 14, but I'm sure he was doing it when he went sailing alone long before that. Dad had a serious alcoholism problem and had to be under tight control at home. On the boat he was who he was. It was a pressure release for him. I made sure to always go with him so he didn't have to get drunk alone. Mom hated sailing and never went with us. I'm not sure whether this memory is happy or sad. Hard to choose from. Having cause, saltines and Vienna sausages for breakfast on fishing trips. Age 9 or 10 and up. Witnessing him giving my older 16-17 yo brother condoms. Driving off from gas station, the fuel pump hose still in the tank. Multiple times. Pulling us behind a Suburban on snowy and icy streets at night using a rope. Metal skids went over cold fingers. I can still feel that pain. Shooting handguns on farm at empty cans. I was about 14-15. Chinese fire drills in the middle of 5-lane roads. Watching scrambled Playboy Channel show on vintage French postcards. For your information, I'm number 3 of 4 kids and a female. F. Kind of a tomboy then, I guess. What's a Chinese fire drill? My family really enjoys playing golf. While I was a middle schooler, they would try to prepare me to play golf competitively once I started high school. Being the angsty young teenager that I was, I refused to do what the parents liked and instead was like, tennis is what I do. After many tennis lessons and long trips to the court so I could practice on the plywood wall thing, my mother, being the half genius, half crazy, resourceful southern lady that she is, decided heck with this. We can build a wall at the house and you can just practice here. Dad and I ended up creating these big 2x4 reinforced plywood things, for lack of a better word, that would hook into some weird butt piece that mom found at Lowe's Hardware, all the while exclaiming, yeah, this'll work. Yeah, I'm sure. These plywood backboards were incredibly heavy and awkward to lift vertically and hook into these metal bars that we had bolted into a shed that was in our backyard. One day, Dad decided it was time for me to get some practice in before mom got home. When I offered help in putting the boards up, he waved me off going, "No, I think I can get this." This I did not doubt, because my dad was about 270 pounds of semi-solid muscle. He handled the first board with relative ease, but when putting the second board up on the wall, he dropped it before it was fully in place. Gravity happened, and it fell on his face, knocking his teeth out. Excuse me, his false teeth out, that I did not know about until right then, the 15th-ish year of my life. I stood back, eyes wide and full of confusion. What did he do? Scoop those suckers right up off the asphalt and pop them right back in without any sort of cleaning or whatever? He turned to look at me and we both stood in shocked silence for a second. Don't tell your mother. Fast forward a couple years. Dad has a stroke. Mom and I arrive at the hospital after the ambulance gets him to the ER. Like hospitals do, they give your personal effect to your family for safekeeping. In the little sanitary plastic bag thingy was a set of teeth. The nurse handed the bag to mom, who immediately brought up the fact that there must have been some mistake made, because my father had always had great teeth. After the nurse lifted my then unconscious father's gums to reveal the gaping void left where said teeth should have been, did mom look at me with the same shocked with eyes agape in confusion as I did with dad during the tennis board incident. I giggled. God, I miss him. Cancer is the putchute. Sorry about your dad. This is a comical secret for you two to have shared. I'm also LOLing at the waspiness of your family wanting you to golf, but your angsty teenage self rebelling by only wanting to play tennis. My mother was an alcoholic growing up and some years ago she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Some weeks later I was just sitting next to my father on the couch watching TV and he silently hands me a newspaper, pointing at one particular stub of an article. It was about a study that claimed alcoholism leads to a significantly heightened risk of breast cancer. We then kind of decided that it was probably best not to share that with her, though there's no knowing if she had read the same article that morning. Kind of a small thing, but the memory always stays with me, where it links two significant periods in my life together. I had a lot of those moments with my father. A report was just released yesterday that alcoholism is directly responsible for 7 different cancers, including breast cancer. I had no idea. I don't want to show my mom. She would worry even more about my dad. My mother wasn't allowing me to have contact with my father while I was 13. He was living in Australia at the time, me in New Zealand, and I was going over for a sporting thing. She deliberately told me I was not to contact him while there. Needless to say, not only did I contact him, I stayed at his place and he paid for my trip. I'm 24 now and she still has no idea I saw him. When my cousin died, we took in his epileptic cat. My mom accidentally left the gate open and she got away like 2 of my other pets a few years later. To this day my mom believes she found another home, but my dad told me that he found the cat's body up the street on the side of the road, so he buried her in secret. My cousin's death was pretty hard on my family, including my mom, and my dad knew she couldn't handle it. Plus she was going through her midlife change and acted crazy a decent amount of the time. That's why this is a secret. Oh, and I've smoked weed with my dad a few times. Just casually drop that last part in there. I had a live-in girlfriend. We tried hard to convince everyone that she was just a friend with a really crap mother. One day we tested the noise of my bed and it was apparent the sounds of our fricking was not limited to our room. My stepdad ran interference for years. He's a great guy. I miss her. She disappeared off the net like I did. I came home from a camping trip early to help my dad with a remodel and we spent the first night drowning ourselves in Burger King chicken tenders and Halo, neither of which I was allowed to have in my life. It is one of my happiest memories. I told this story in a similar thread. When I was a kid, my friend and I used to go on a camping trip every summer for years. We used to love going to Yogi Bear's Jellystone Park because it had a pool, arcade, and they would show Yogi Bear cartoons late at night. One year we were walking around the park with my dad. We started climbing a tree and while up there we noticed that there were all these toys in a dumpster behind the gift shop. We climbed back down and told my dad. He saw how excited we were and said, "Come on, I'll give you guys a boost." So he boosted us up into the dumpster and we started to find all these toys. There were a bunch of stuffed Yogi Bears that looked brand new, a bunch of random action figures, and more. We were so pumped and I asked my dad if we could keep them. He said, sure. So we started handing them down to him. We made off with a decent toy haul and were very happy. We started heading back to our campsite when my dad stopped us both and said, "Look, if your mother asks I bought you those Yogi Bears and if she see the other toys just say you've had them. She would kill me if she found out I helped you kids into a dumpster." When we got back to camp we showed her the stuffed bears and she saw how happy we were and never asked any other questions. To this day she doesn't know my dad let us go dumpster diving. This is a pretty cute story, actually. Thanks for sharing. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.